Florida State and Tennessee, Tallahassee and Knoxville, two places trying to shake things up as much as they can.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, the portal, coaching carousel, that and more. We've got it all here. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. It's that easy. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Let's start with Florida State. They've made it very clear that they are unhappy with their situation in the ACC. Do you know how long there is between now and the start of this upcoming football season? Quite a long time. About 6 months, as it were. That's half of a year, and plus a couple of days in there as well. So there is a lot of time for Florida State to try and figure this out. And the cogs on these gears have already been turning for quite a while to figure out how they can depart the ACC. And if they are successful in raising the amount of money that they get from private equity, they will leave the ACC. They'll do it in a heartbeat because the Big Ten and the SEC have separated so distinctly from the other two conferences. The distinction that they all draw is the Power Four. That's the label for them, right? I've referred to them differently here on the show. It's the Power Two and the next two. And the next two, the ACC and the Big 12, they are most definitely, they are clearly, defiantly the next two. There is also a pretty clear and obvious gap. And going into the 12-team playoff, I don't think Florida State needs to leave the ACC. I mean, if you're going to be a big fish in a smaller pond, guess what? That's going to get you into the playoff far more often than not. I think Florida State this year, even without Jordan Travis and Keon Coleman and Jared Verse and all the guys they lost, I have them as a playoff lock going into this year. They should be the unquestioned favorites with the way they can build a roster, with the way Mike Norvell coaches. That's a really, really good program down there. And so Florida State, looking at this move, I don't think is necessary, but it's happening. It is absolutely happening. There's a great piece in the Tampa Bay Times looking at all these different financial options and these plans and different avenues and ways to raise money and ways to invest their money. Everything is lining up for Florida State to make a big, splashy move and just completely set off another massive round of realignment. Because if Florida State leaves the ACC, them along with Clemson on the football field, the most important sports product that you have as an athletic department, those two schools are carrying the water for most everybody else. If those two leave, that league is teetering on, well, is it getting power consideration? Because I got news for you, Stanford, Cal, and SMU, they're not going to save you in that regard. Would the Big 12 then act? Would there be a super mega third conference of everybody that's not in the power ranks? Would you see teams from the Big 12 try to jump? If Florida State is able to get out, then Clemson certainly, I think, would explore the same sorts of options. They don't want to be left behind. Now, Dabo Swinney with the NIL and portal, he's, kind of having college football pass him by in a little bit. He just had a horrible season. He went 9-4. Just a disaster. A disaster over there at Clemson, which by the standard that he himself has set, it kind of sort of was. And I'm curious to see what they do this year. But if Florida State leaves, Clemson is then going to look at those particular options. And the price has been the sticking point. And if Florida State, the initial report was they'd need $500 million in order to leave the ACC, to break the grant of rights, to pay everything off and whatnot, and get an invite to the SEC or the Big Ten. If they would do anything to get there, then they would try and make it happen. But what if a settlement is reached? What if that number comes down from $500 million or $600 million or $7 or whatever number it was? What if it comes down to like 2 or 3 or 4? Well, suddenly that seems a lot more reasonable. And the reason these stars are aligning and why Florida State is a school you've got to keep your eye on as the next major domino to fall is that they are on the precipice of making a number of key investments. The piece in the Tampa Bay Times talks about the renovations that they're looking at for their football stadium. Those are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. They're trying to raise money or issue bonds, take on debt, whatever they have to do to make that happen. Well, if you're trying to make those sorts of wholesale changes when you're already a flagship program for your conference, doesn't that align more with what you would do if you're trying to prove that you belong with the big boys? That you should be a part of the SEC? That you should be a part of the Big Ten, whichever conference would take you there? That's the way it comes off to me. So the involvement of all of this outside money at Florida State, stadium renovations, and they've talked about minor league baseball and all this sort of stuff that they are looking at. It's a worthwhile read. And it's not a long one over at the Tampa Bay Times by Matt Baker. It was published not that long ago. I think that is indicative of what Florida State could do and that all these stars could be aligning. They might need a legal victory or two, but guess what? The schools seem to be getting these legal victories. That's the way it appears to be, depending on what you define as a legal victory, of course, which brings me to Tennessee. So Tennessee is in court with the NCAA right now, and they are slapping them upside the head. They being Tennessee, the slappee, of course, in this situation is the NCAA. Why? Because they lost the Dartmouth case. The men's basketball players there were deemed to be employees of the university. They're getting worked pretty hard in the USC case, it seems. The lawyer for Tennessee is feeling, shall we say, very confident after a preliminary injunction was ruled that put the NCAA's rules on hold until they can figure out and adjudicate the case and determine what applies and whatnot. Here's a great, this says it all about where things are heading and why I feel like these big changes are just so very, very close to happening. Quote, this is from the lawyer representing Tennessee. And one of the things most interesting that we heard is that even the NCAA is a little unclear on the NIL rules. At one point, we heard that student athletes were able to talk about NIL opportunities. Then we immediately heard, well, actually, they can't really talk about them with anybody who's actually going to make the decision. End quote. If one parent, I'm not a parent, so maybe this is an ill-suited metaphor, but I was raised by parents, so I think it applies. If one parent is saying you're not allowed to do X, and you go to the other parent and say you're absolutely allowed to do X, I don't know how it worked in your house, but the one saying no to a potentially dumb idea is probably mom, and the one saying yes is probably dad. That's just my experience sometimes. Anyway, I hope my mom or dad listen to this, but anyway, so I just think that when you have that dynamic, is that a good sign? Is that indicative that those two have had the communication on a particular matter, that they've talked out all the implications and that they know that they're on the same page and that they're in lockstep agreement? No, not really. If the NCAA isn't even able to enforce its own rules or know what its rules are, how in the world can they be in court with Tennessee saying you violated these rules? And Tennessee is coming to them and saying, what rules? Well, you know. Don't you know? No. Can you explain them, please? Well, it's this. Isn't it also this? Well, yeah. It's not a great look up there. So, Florida State, outside help. Tennessee winning in court. These are going to be massive changes. We're in the middle of February, folks. There is an eternity between now and the start of the season, and all these changes that you talk about and you think about in the abstract are a lot closer than you think. Colorado might be closer than you think to contending in the Big 12. I don't know if they're there yet, but they just made a move that makes me want to triple down on them over 5.5 wins. I'll triple down on supporting FanDuel here on this very show because you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Doesn't matter what it is. Could be a random NBA game. Could be a college basketball game. Anything you want, they've got it. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. We've got college football win totals. We've got college football over-unders for said win totals, obviously. We've got Heisman odds, national championship odds. Everything is there, and it's the middle of February. Isn't it glorious? Get in on the action before the lines move. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Colorado has finally made their hire, and I'm a big fan because it's coming down from the NFL ranks. Robert Livingston is the new defensive coordinator for the Colorado Buffaloes. Joining me to talk about it, Kevin Borba, the host of Locked On Buffs, joining me on Locked On College Football. Kevin, I like this move. You bring in a guy that's got that sort of pedigree. It's consistent with what Coach Prime has looked for in his staff. He wants people that have an NFL background, and you know, he spent the last 6 years, Livingston has, coaching the safeties, 8 total on the Bengals defensive staff. I like the move. What do you make of it?
I think it's a great move. I also think it's a risky move. And I think those two things could be synonymous. Realistically, he has a lot of NFL experience, which Coach Prime has kind of talked about. He wants his staff to be NFL-esque. They want to treat the team like it's an NFL team and give those guys the proper tools to succeed. And I think someone who has this much talent and coaching experience at the NFL level works. He also was a scout, so I feel like that kind of translates to recruiting. Where I would get concerned is he's never coordinated a defense. Is he ready to go from positional coach to coordinator? Obviously, he's been in the league for a hot minute, and I feel like you kind of learn by osmosis and you learn just by being around fellow play callers. But is he ready to kind of be the guy that's like, okay, this is my entire unit. This is what I control. But I do think he's young, which is a great hire as well. College kids love playing for young coaches. And so I think there's a lot of pros, but I do think it's a little risky to kind of go with someone who had no coordinating experience.
I think there is an element of risk involved with that, to be sure. But it doesn't remind me, as you were bringing that up, I was thinking about Brandon Staley, who had some risk with him because felt like on his NFL coaching journey, he kind of skipped a couple of steps to be the Rams DC. He was that for 1 year, and then he was the head coach. The difference here with Livingston is, yeah, he hasn't coordinated a defense before, but he's been around a lot of high-level coaches in the NFL. I mean, the Bengals DC the last several years, Lou Anarumo, I think is how you pronounce his name, that guy's really good. Really, really good. And so being under a guy like that, I think gives me some confidence in this particular move. Yeah, there could be an adjustment period there, but I looked at what Staley went through and it was, okay, I think this was a little early. And yeah, he hasn't called a defense before, but it's not too early. It feels like this is kind of the natural jumping off point to me to have the ability to call plays.
Yeah, and I also think it helps. You have Coach Prime's coaching staff, which I don't think a lot of people realize. There's former head coaches on there. So if he ever has, let's say, confusion or just questions, he has people there to help him out. And obviously it's not like he's some dude that just picked up coaching like a month ago. Like, he's been around the block. It's just not in the defense coordinator capacity. And also he's inheriting a really good group of players. I think had he inherited last year's defense, I don't know what the difference could be, but they upgraded in the portal. So he has talent around him in the coaching room. And then obviously he has talent on the field that he should be able to maximize. And realistically, Coach Prime, very knowledgeable fella. People forget, maybe they shouldn't forget, but he has a gold jacket. The dude knows a thing or two about football. So I think Mr. Robert Livingston is in good company, and he's proven to kind of put guys in good positions. Jesse Bates has been really good under him. He's been all-pro twice in the past couple of years. So for that to translate to the college level, I think is something, I won't say it's for certain, but realistically, he has the pedigree, like you mentioned, he has the experience. And like you said, it's the next step. It's just a little risky to me to go from position coach to all of a sudden you're running a defense for a team that, whether people want to admit or not, is going to be the most scrutinized team in college football. Is he ready for that? We don't know, because he will instantly be the scapegoat if things go wrong.
Well, he could. We saw it last year. Sean Lewis was the offensive coordinator. The offense was just fine, and then they stripped him of those duties. He's now the head coach at San Diego State in the coaching carousel, and I did not like what Colorado did with him in that particular role. I didn't think that was the right move at all. The problem was the defense, and that is where Robert Livingston is going to come in and really have to make an impact immediately. There is a challenge. There's an unknown element to him, and I think those are fair questions to ask, but Colorado's win total, it has been bumped up to 5.5. Many are saying because of the influence of Locked On College Football, but that's just
and Locked On Bucks
and Locked On Bucks. Yes, of course, the two Locked On shows. So you were also on the 4.5. Give me the over all day, every day. I
was projecting 6 before it was at
5.5. I still like them over 5.5 as well, but there were real issues on Colorado's defense last year. The offense, they didn't run the ball consistently, but that's really because their offensive line was overmatched, and he had a great quarterback in Deion Sanders. They have addressed the offensive line. I like that. They have also addressed their defensive line, bringing in guys like B.J. Green. There are other players in the portal who you can speak to that are going to be key cogs in the defense for Robert Livingston this year. But what are the biggest issues that he's got to come in and solve on that side of the ball that he's now coordinating?
Yeah, I think for one, and this isn't even football related, it's discipline. This team had so many costly penalties on defense. The Stanford game stands out just because, one, they blew a 29-point lead, but I think they had like 4 or 5 like illegal substitutions. One of them was after a TV timeout. So timeout ends, 13 guys or 12 guys run onto the field. Like that can't happen. There was a lot of like defensive holdings, late hits on the quarterback, like discipline, like kind of get the culture in the right area. Also physicality on the defense line and stopping the run. The Big 12 has Devin Neal, they have Taj Brooks, they have talented running backs. Utah has a stable of running backs. They have talented running backs all over the place, and Colorado was horrendous against the run last season. So if they can't stop the run, they're not going to win games. I will say though, he did inherit a better roster. Like realistically, I look at this Colorado defense, and I did a depth chart projection a couple this past week, and me and Scott Proctor from the USA Today, we had, I think, 3 guys from last season that will start this year on defense. It was Travis Hunter, Shiloh Sanders, and then one of the linebackers. Everyone else, or maybe 2 of the linebackers, so 4 guys at the most. Everyone else is going to be a transfer or someone new. Like there's going to be a whole new unit. Everyone that started last year is probably going to go into like a rotational piece or reserve role, and I think that's what they needed. None of those guys, or most of those guys, were not really starting caliber. It was just they started out of necessity. So he needs to get them more physical, more disciplined, and realistically, they just need to be better all around because they were bad at pretty much everything.
Yeah, I like what you said about the discipline. There were a lot of undisciplined moments, whether it was an unsportsmanlike penalty or I remember the substitutions against Stanford and Colorado State both, I think were just it was a mess. It
happened too frequently.
Yes.
And then also this just goes for the team as a whole. They had such bad times substituting. Like they were not aware of the rule where like when they could substitute, when they couldn't substitute, like on defense. I think they honestly thought they could just substitute freely. And it's like, there's rules to prevent certain things.
It felt very chaotic at points last year. So I'm glad that you brought that up. You talked about addressing the run defense, but does he have the personnel to coordinate a defense that's just top half in the Big 12? Because if they do, with what they've done on the offensive line and Deion Sanders, a quarterback, that could be a 7-8 win team.
Yeah, I think the defense realistically could take a step to being in that top echelon. They have 2 pass rushers that had 5 sacks last season, Samuel O from Pitt, and then they also have B.J. Green from ASU, like you mentioned, all Pac-12 guy. They have guys that are really good, experienced, and proven, and they didn't have that last year. And so I wouldn't say they could be the best defense in the Big 12 because I haven't seen them play together. We don't even really know what scheme Robert Livingston would prefer, but it's such a good, such a much better roster where it's like, it would not shock me if they are a world's better defense, because if they're not, it's like, was this the right hire? That would be the question I would be asking at the end of the year. If Colorado is still one of the worst defenses in the country and in the Big 12, it's like, okay, is it a talent issue or is it a coaching issue? But I think realistically, he has the keys, the players, to kind of succeed realistically in this new Big 12.
Kevin Borba, host of Locked On Buffs. We've got more coming up on today's show. It's Cruton time because I've got a question to ask. And we've got Brian Smith coming up next, but we'll let Kevin go for now. Kevin, thanks so much for stopping by.
Yep.
Today's episode of Locked On College Football is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Right now, all users get $100 off when you buy a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. With killer last-minute deals all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You see the view from your seat before you buy. You get an all-in price, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Right now, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app. Use code VEGAS100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Well, it's a tall task, but could anybody unseat the SEC and bring in the highest ranked recruiting class in the country going forward? We're talking about that with Brian Smith, our Locked On Recruiting Insider. LinkedIn Jobs is our official Locked On recruiting sponsor here at the network. So, Brian, 16 consecutive years, the SEC has brought in the highest ranked recruiting class. There's been Georgia, there's been Alabama, there's been Texas A&M. Can anybody knock the SEC off of that spot?
There's a small list, but it is a daunting task. LSU is in that grouping as well, Florida, etc. Miami, I think, could be a possibility. Used to be, you could say Texas, but now they're joining the Southeastern Conference. So Florida State, possibly in the right year, could. But, man, that's a pretty short list. Ohio State right now, with the way they're recruiting, especially at corner, we talked about that recently on this very show, they're trending in the right direction. I'm surprised Urban didn't have a consensus number 1 class when he was at Ohio State. But other than those schools, man, there's not many. Maybe Penn State or Notre Dame, but I think they're more likely to be 4 to 10. I don't think they're going to finish number 1. If I had to guess one school, I'd probably pick Miami, though, because Mario gets after it on the trail.
Yeah, he does. And the place where Mario used to coach at Oregon has got the number 3 class in the country this year. Right. USC is located in Los Angeles. They've got a top 20 class this year, but not even top 10 under Lincoln Riley. I don't know if the 8-5 season had a lot or anything to do with that, but is there any chance out west that you could see the highest ranked class in the country belong to I guess now former Pac-12 school?
Being in the Big Ten helps. I think that you'll see Oregon and Southern Cal get a kid from Ohio or Chicago or a kid from Minneapolis that they wouldn't normally get, in addition to the kids from San Francisco, the kids from Fresno, San Diego, and, of course, Los Angeles. All those areas are very fertile for the Ducks, for the Trojans, etc. It's possible. They need to get it, though. They would almost have to have like the top quarterback in their class, because you're not going to win the trench war against Georgia, Bama. Georgia, Bama, Clemson, LSU, that grouping through there, their D-line, O-line classes are incredible pretty much every year. So you need a 5-star quarterback or something like that, maybe the number 1 receiver in the country. And if you get that, you got a chance.
So for Miami, I think that's a pretty good pick because they've got the recruiting base in their backyard. Cristobal prioritizes it at a very high level. They've got a great recruiting class in the 2024 cycle once again. Do you think that the results on the field have to improve for Miami to translate that into a number 1 class? Because you know that the big schools in the SEC, whether it's, I expect the recruiting to take a step back without Alabama there, which certainly opens the door for somebody because Saban isn't there at Alabama. They'll still recruit well, but will it be the same? No, I definitely don't hold that particular belief. But Georgia can pitch, hey, we've won 2 national championships. Or LSU can pitch, hey, we won a national championship recently. Or Ohio State, Big Ten champion or contender continually year in, year out and whatnot. Does it have to happen on the field for a team like Oregon or Miami or Ohio State to eclipse that top spot? Do they have to get to a national championship game, win a national championship? Does that need to take place?
I think it depends on the school. Miami might be one of the few that it's no, because they can be 6-6 and they're still in the most fertile area in the country. It's just some of those kids just aren't going to leave home, man. It's the easiest job when things are right, in some people's opinion, is Miami. Maybe LSU, maybe Southern Cal. There's a few in that, Texas. But for the most part, you need to be 9-3 or better at those programs too, even at Texas or whatever. Do you think it's a little easier for Sarkisian? They made the playoffs this past year. It's a selling point. Mario's coming off 7-6. They need to start really well this next year. And by the way, Miami, for those of you who don't know, opens at the Swamp and plays the Gators in week 1. I believe it's August 31st.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of an important game. If you win that, because they recruit so much against the Gators, well, that's going to help. It's going to be on national TV. Everybody's going to want to talk about that game. If they can start out like 8-2, 9-1, and their FanDuel, I believe, has them at 9.5 wins is their projection, which is, by the way, the same as Alabama. When was the last time that happened?
It has been a while. It has been a while. But to put a bow on this, Brian, how do you out-recruit the SEC? How can you surpass them and get that top class, no matter who it is, whether it's Miami, Oregon, Ohio State, or somebody like Notre Dame?
You have to win when you play them. Again, Miami has to beat UF. They need to be ranked. They got to go to the playoff. Towards the end of the cycle, a lot of Florida kids flip. If you're in contention to go to the playoff, especially if you're in contention for one of the buys, one of the 4 seeds at the top, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that's going to be very fruitful for you on National Signing Day in December of 2024. Other than that, I mean, it's just getting to that playoff year in, year out. This year alone, it's the starting point. But then after you make it there, it makes it easier every year after that you win. Like, look at all the kids that left Nick Saban in Alabama. They left because of Saban, not because it was Alabama. When he left, all those guys did. They want to go somewhere they trust in the coaching staff to be there, and that are proven winners.
You were at a camp down in the Florida area recently, hence the X handle at FBScout_Florida, and saw a couple of the top offensive line recruits, Solomon Thomas, Ziyare Addison. These are guys that are coveted by all the biggest schools and whatnot. Let's start with Thomas. Why is he such a highly rated prospect, and does he have a lean right now in the 2025 cycle?
He is a tremendous football player from Jacksonville Reigns, 6'4", 315, 320 pounds, and he's just put together, man. He's one of the few guys that wants to play on the interior instead of tackle because he likes the grind of beating up with the really massive guy. He's a different dude.
I respect that. I respect that a lot.
I do too. I always get like the 6'2" guy thinks that he's playing tackle. It's like, no, bro, you're playing on the inside. Solomon's athletic enough to play left tackle, but he still wants to play on the interior. What's that tell you about what's between his ears? He's a little different. Offers from every school in the country, technically committed to Florida State, but he just visited Florida. He's going to look at Miami. He's going to look at other schools too. His recruitment's probably going to drag out, but when he puts his hands on somebody, it's pretty ugly. There was one rep at the Under Armour camp this past weekend. The opposing lineman did not get off the line of scrimmage. One hand just completely stymied him and kept the kid there at the line. It was hilarious. Yeah, that is as rare as it gets for an offensive lineman, especially because they're not in pads. And everybody's like, holy cow, that's a guard? So he's a dominant player that can go to any school he wants.
Is he going to stay out east, do you think? You mentioned he's from the Florida area, got Florida schools after him. Is that the expectation, or could someone from the middle of the country or out west try and swoop in for him?
I mean, Ohio State, somebody like that is possible, but I think he'll stay down south. The 3 schools in the state of Florida are the primaries, and I also think there's a chance maybe Georgia, LSU, something like that.
Let's go to another top offensive lineman in the 2025 class, because we're all about giving the big fellas some love here on Locked On College Football. That's how we roll. And you can see Brian's face on YouTube. He likes that more. Yes. Quarterbacks, receivers, somebody's got to block for him. He's got the trench shirt on. Yeah, he's all about the big fellas. Ziyare Addison, somebody else that is going to be very highly recruited. It's not going to be, an easy decision from the standpoint that he doesn't have just a couple schools after him. He's got anybody who's everybody after him.
Yeah, his offer list is pretty dumb too. Miami, Florida State, Florida, Clemson. He's going to visit Alabama coming up, Georgia Tech. His decision isn't that, he's not happy with the options. It's like, how do you narrow it down? His offer list is similar to Solomon's, that it's pretty much across the board. He doesn't know where he's going. I know him well. He's from the greater Tampa area, goes to Sumner High School, just south of the city. Left tackle all day. And he's got the length that you look for. He's a former basketball player and defensive lineman that converted to O-line. He's 280 and lean. Those are not things that usually go hand in hand. So great kid, and he just really starting to learn his craft. His upside's through the roof. I would not wager on where he's going, but if he went to Texas, Oregon, Ohio State, or Miami, none of it would surprise me. Like, he's taking it all in and just kind of trying to make an educated decision.
Always good to talk some recruiting. Brian Smith, brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, our Locked On Recruiting Insider. Appreciate you stopping by, Brian.
Thank you very much, sir.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.